In July 2022, my account was subjected to a fraud, and I believe that is now called an action push payment fraud, whereby the contents of the account was stolen. I was sitting in my niece's house, my sister's house. It was late in the evening, and I received a text message on the text messaging number that I have for Revolut in my phone, that I'd received previous communication from them, and it basically asked me if I had conducted a transaction on an iPhone in Norwich, and clearly that wasn't me, so I panicked a little bit and just thought it was a substantial amount, just under £8,000 that they were saying had been attempted to be transacted from the account, and to ring the number that was in the text message. I didn't at all. I rang the number. I went through the options that were given, press 1 for account balance, 2 to report lost or stolen, 3 for fraud, and I was on hold for a little while before I was put through to somebody. I was introduced to a male, very well-spoken male, who introduced himself to me as Ian Pemberton, and he basically repeated the question that had I conducted this attempted transaction, and I said, no, that's not me. He said, well, in this case, I need you to go into the app on your phone. Again, no suspicions whatsoever, because I used my fingerprints biometric identification to access the app. However, when I did go into the app, I could see that there was some kind of remote access going on, and he obviously said he was in the account already. He knew all my transactions because he gave details of my previous transactions to me. I didn't disclose any information whatsoever, none. So I didn't become suspicious during the whole process, primarily because although there was a degree and a sense of urgency involved on my part as well, because I didn't want my account to be insecure and to lose the money that was in there, from him as well. However, he put me on hold a couple of times to check things. He told me that the money would be transferred into a secure account that would be set up in my name. And when he gave me the account details, I was sat with my niece at the time, so she Googled it, and it came back that it would be a new, not a new Revolut account, but it was a Revolut account and sort code. So I had no reason whatsoever. His demeanour was calm, reassuring, and although somewhere in the back of my mind I just thought, I'm not 100% sure if this is right. Any confusion or suspicion that I thought I might have had, and any challenge I made to him, was totally dismissed and reassured. So the transaction went ahead. I did query, because I had a euro balance on the account. I queried, would I lose money on the exchange, because he said it needed to be transferred back into sterling. So again, at that point I thought, well, he had an answer for that, so that's not an issue. And that was done first with his guidance, and all the authentication codes were sent through to me on text message. At the same time, I could hear emails coming through, and I'm assuming at that point they were from Revolut as well. I did check later on, and they were. So everything that I did coincided with receiving emails from Revolut as well. And the text messages were coming through with authentication codes on. So once a transfer of the euros had gone back into sterling, there's a deposit of £100 into this new account, and it was in my name. If he'd have said it was going to be in job logs, I wouldn't have done it at all. However, what there wasn't on my account was the facility and capacity to check the sort code and account in the app. But obviously we'd done that externally, thought it was genuine. And then when the final balance went through, he put me on hold, but he'd done that quite a few times during the call, and the call lasted for about 35, 40 minutes. And again, because he'd not rushed me through anything, and his demeanour was calm all the way through, and he had an answer for everything, I genuinely 100% believed at that point when that money went through that he was genuine. It was only when the phone went dead, and part of that was my fault because my son had tried to ring me, and I pressed to him on the phone, and I thought I'd mispressed and disconnected the call, but I just thought, oh, he'll ring me back because he's been so pleasant and so nice on the phone. He'll ring me back and he'll confirm that the money's gone through. Well, there was no recall. none whatsoever. And I sat there for a moment and I thought, I'm going to check these emails. And the emails were all the same. If wasn't you, if you didn't do this transaction, contact us. However, the only difference being it said via in-app chat on the app. There was no telephone number, no number given whatsoever. And at that point, I didn't even know that you couldn't speak to Revolut on the telephone. I didn't know they didn't even have a telephone number. I only found that out when I then went on to the Revolut app. Once I finally found the in-app chat facility, because it's very difficult to find on the app as well, that's when I realised I couldn't physically speak to anybody, because I asked to speak to somebody, I asked them to ring me. They said, we don't do telephone calls. And that's when I really knew that, boof, I'd been scammed. Absolutely devastated, upset, embarrassed, sick to the pit of my stomach initially. Absolutely sick to the pit of my stomach. And I just sat there with my head in my hands saying, how has this happened to me? I thought, well, I need to sort this out. I need to sort it out fast. And I then researched the number myself on my phone, and that's when it came up as the Metro Bank. So my first port of contact was to contact them, because I'd done what I needed to do on the Revolut in-app side of things. I'd contacted them. They'd sent me, it was a robot to start with. So it was a robot that didn't understand what I was writing down. So then they sent me a list of questions I had to answer. So I answered all those questions, and whilst I was waiting for them to respond back, I contacted the fraud department at the Metro, spoke to a gentleman there who gave me an email address to contact the day after to tell them what had happened. I inquired if they could put a stop on the account, and they couldn't. I said they didn't have the facility to do that. However, if I sent the email in, that it would be investigated at their end in that respect. I felt that Revolut handled the whole situation right from the initial outset to their decision at the end absolutely atrociously. There was no empathy at all. During some of the communication I had with them, all of which was obviously in-app conversation, there were problems with the app, that questions I would answer would disappear off the screen. Now, I screenshot absolutely everything. Every little piece of communication that I had with them, I screenshot it and saved it into my gallery on my phone. They denied they had technical problems, said it was my end. One of the representatives said she fully understood how I felt because she'd been a victim herself. Well, when you're a victim, you don't always want to hear that off somebody else. You don't. You want them to say, well, we're doing the best that we can and we're going to investigate it, which they said that they were investigating it. But when I queried what they were doing, how they were doing it, who they were speaking to, what procedures they were going to undertake, they wouldn't even answer the questions. They never answered a question that I put forward to them at all. All they did say was that they were going to contact the bank where their money had gone to and see if they could recover the funds. Following that, yes, Revolut got in touch with the Metro Bank and informed me that all the money bar £20 had been taken out of the account and that they were going to try and recover that £20 back to my account, which they subsequently did. And when I asked them if they were going to reimburse me for the other money, I'd put my case forward to them. I'd detailed everything that they'd asked me to detail. I'd explained everything as best as I could in chronological order and quite in fine detail. And they basically said that they weren't being held accountable for my actions and that I was responsible for sending the money, even though I felt I wasn't. I felt that obviously if there'd been facilities in place to check the sort code and account number, that they were liable and they needed to pay me back. They basically said that that wasn't the case and that the Metro Bank couldn't investigate it any further as well. They liaised with them. I queried and questioned the facilities, like I said, that they had in place, and they basically said that they think that they had put enough fraud warnings in place, and they also detailed and said that they'd sent me, I think it was about 6 emails and 6 messages via the in-app messaging system, which I never look at and I've never looked at. But I thought, well, no, I'll check. I will go back and I'll check if I can find these messages that have been sent, and I'll go back and check all my emails. The date, the 21st of January 22 and 3rd of February 22, nothing received whatsoever. 16th of September 22, earn £50 to refer a friend. 27th of September 22, the same, but as a reminder. The 20th of September 22, advertisement, fuel your freelance card. Nothing whatsoever about fraud or how to, if you were a victim of fraud with them, how to deal with it. Nothing whatsoever. And they just said that they'd sent them through, that I must have put them in my junk or lost them or deleted them. But that wasn't the case. I can recover deleted emails. I went through absolutely everything. There was nothing. But even so, 6 emails that haven't been opened that could go into your junk, that they know that could go into somebody's junk folder, isn't sufficient. There needs to be something at that point of the transaction going through. And there wasn't. Nothing whatsoever. And that's why I felt that they were responsible, because they had not protected me sufficiently enough. All the evidence that you submitted was online. It was like a flow chart. Did this happen? Yes. If not, go back a page. You know, if this happened, then submit this. And there was no guidance anywhere really. I did look online, Citizens Advice Bureau, Martin Lewis's, money advice pages, things like that, as to how to proceed forward with these. Nowhere at all did I see anything that would say to me, seek legal advice. Before you start to deal with the Financial Ombudsman, seek legal advice, because what you don't know is that once you're involved with the Financial Ombudsman, it's very difficult to get legal advice because firms don't want to get involved. But once you put the paperwork in to the Financial Ombudsman, it disappears off the screen. Now, I'd done a Word document, copied and pasted it and put it in, but again, if you didn't know that happened and you were just answering the questions and putting your evidence together, you'd lose it all. It would just disappear. And then, obviously, if you need to refer back to that in the future for any reason, it's all gone. And it's gone to the Ombudsman, but you don't have a copy of it. And they don't send you a copy of it. All they send is acknowledgement of receipt of your submission. And the other issue with the Ombudsman, in my opinion, was the time frame from me submitting my original complaint to them against Revolut to nobody actually being appointed to deal with it. And I'm ringing up and being told, well, it's not even been allocated yet, but it will be allocated in the new year. And I said, well, that's not acceptable. It's not good enough. Well, we've got a massive backlog from COVID. So, well, that's fair enough, but, what am I going to do? Where do I stand? My money's disappeared and I need the money, And it was only when I said I wanted to speak to somebody higher up about it being allocated that the next thing I received communication.
Mrs. Doherty had looked into making a complaint herself via the Financial Ombudsman Service, which hadn't gone to plan. She then looked online for solicitors to help, and after contacting a few firms that she'd come across locally, she'd had no luck. After looking online, she then came across TLW Solicitors, and after speaking to her, we decided that it's something we could assist with moving forward. Looking at Mrs. Doherty's case, when that came to me, it was a very difficult case. One of the challenges that we had faced was that she had already made a complaint to her bank and then escalated that to the Financial Ombudsman Service. Unfortunately, the complaint had been rejected at the initial stage of the Financial Ombudsman Service. I don't know if people are aware, but FOS is a 2-tier system, so if your complaint is rejected at that first stage, you can then escalate it to an ombudsman, but if it is rejected ultimately at that point, then your claim has failed. After agreeing to take on Mrs. Doherty's case, what we did is we got her file of papers from the Financial Ombudsman Service so we could see exactly what had gone on to date, and the possible reasons why her complaint had been rejected. We also asked her for copies of her bank statements so that we could look through those to see whether the transactions had been unusual or if the bank had taken any steps to warn her or protect her before the transaction took place. Looking at her file, we did not agree that the Financial Ombudsman had made the correct decision in her case. So what we did at that point was to write to the Financial Ombudsman to say that we would be taking over conduct and to request an extension so that detailed further submissions could be pleaded on her case.
As soon as I spoke to Alex, she put me at ease straight away and she just said, now we've got the extension, we will be preparing the case. And there was a massive sense of urgency to do it. And it wasn't like, I knew it wouldn't be sat on somebody's desk. I just knew straight away that she'd get on with it, and she did. And that was just, and it literally was that every day I got some kind of communication back and I knew it was being dealt with. And that's all I could ask for, because I had a lot of personal trauma going on myself at the time, and knowing that somebody else was taking that pressure off was just such a relief. Basically, I'd submitted the report that I'd submitted to FOS back to Alex, and Alex then sent me more questions through, and she prepared a case on my behalf. She did more research into previous cases and revealed and discovered there'd been quite a lot from Revolut of similar cases that had been settled in the favour of the victim, and she submitted all that back to the Ombudsman, and hey presto, the next thing it was all overturned.
Mrs. Doherty's case probably took around about a month to settle. In part, that's because the complaint was already at the Financial Ombudsman Service. Cases like this can take longer when we are dealing with them from the start because of the work that goes into them, getting the files, raising the complaints. Because hers was already at FOS, what we did was we pleaded further submissions on her case, which were very, very detailed. That included taking instructions from Mrs. Doherty about her circumstances at the time of the transactions to establish if there was anything relevant to her complaint there and could help with that. Once the submissions were made to the Financial Ombudsman Service, we received a decision the next day to say that the decision had been overturned and that a case was upheld, and within 12 hours of that happening, the bank had refunded Mrs. Doherty for the money lost plus interest. I think without TLW's help, ultimately Mrs. Doherty's claim would have failed. It is really David versus Goliath when you see these sort of claims. Banks have huge amounts of resources to put into defending any claims that come against them. Another issue is the banks are fully aware of all the financial regulations and rules that are in place, whereby clients like Mrs. Doherty would not be aware of those. So it is really, really useful to seek legal assistance if you do think you have a claim. TLW solicitors are very, very experienced in this type of work. We know the right places to look to get the information that's needed, whether on the Financial Ombudsman Service website or elsewhere that isn't really available to lay clients.
Having legal representation, without a shadow of a doubt. I can't see that being any other explanation. Although I can word things in a certain format legally in my past history, it's a totally different way of wording things to how solicitors word things. For example, you making reference to stated cases, you're making reference to previous examples, but you also know the terminology, the regulations, the financial regulations that have been breached that I didn't know about. So having all that knowledge and being able to put that in a specific format to represent me back to FOS was invaluable. Absolutely invaluable. No, I couldn't have achieved the final outcome without the help of TLW solicitors. No way. you feel lost. You feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall. You are so embarrassed, certainly with my previous occupation, utterly mortified. And a lot of my friends don't even know it happened. People see this, they'll be like, wow, she got scammed? No. Well, and I'm sure some people will still just think I was being damn right stupid, but I wasn't, honestly. It was just, it's almost like you've got to be there to understand how easy it is for them to do it and how sophisticated they are and how proficient they are at it. That's all I can say really in that respect. First and foremost, don't be embarrassed. Don't feel foolish like I did. Seek advice from the legal professionals. I obviously tried very hard to do it on my own, as I'm sure a lot of other people will still do. But if I'd have known from the outset that trying to deal with FOS on my own would then restrict my accessibility and use of a legal firm to represent me, then I wouldn't have done it on my own. I wouldn't, full stop. But looking online, it's difficult to try and find the advice as to which way forward, because everywhere you look directs you to the Financial Ombudsman Service.
Unfortunately, what has happened to Mrs. Doherty is common and does seem to be becoming more and more common by the day. The banks are aware of impersonation scams, other scams, and just how sophisticated they are, but we are seeing a huge rise in these happening. In our experience, people do seem worried about making a claim, and I think in part the biggest concern they have is the embarrassment of what's happened to them. They feel that they are to blame for what's happened, that they've made a poor decision, but that's simply not the case. These scammers are very, very sophisticated and they are very good at what they are doing, and unfortunately this wouldn't be obvious to a lot of people. TLW Solicitors are very experienced in dealing with these claims, and you're certainly not alone in them. We've seen a huge influx of people coming to us who've been the victim of scams. Our advice always would be, if you do think you or a loved one has fallen victim to a scam, is to get legal assistance as soon as possible, because there are certain time limits that can apply to these cases. We would stress to people to come forward. Don't feel embarrassed, don't feel ashamed. You would be surprised by the huge amount and variation of people who've been affected by these types of scams.
Just the whole demeanour, you're based in the northeast, and that area is renowned for being pleasant and polite, and you are, happy chappies and all the rest of it. But every single time I've rung up or spoken to somebody, I've just been dealt with respect, with empathy, understanding. I've not been made to feel foolish, and above and beyond, you've all been totally professional. And I think that is what counts as well. And just, you got me my money back, so I could hug all lot of you. If Alex was here, I'd give her a big hug. But yeah, just for people to, obviously, I would recommend you straight away to anybody if it happened to anybody. And the distance is irrelevant with the internet and, telephone calls. It doesn't matter that you're up in the northeast at all. I would recommend that people use you. I really would.